For almost 50 years, the entire world was basically holding its breath. We were living under this constant, looming shadow of nuclear war, a war where one tiny mistake, one single miscalculation could have literally ended, well, everything. So let's get into the stories of just how terrifyingly close we came and the really unlikely people who somehow managed to pull us back from the edge.
No, I mean, really. Just stop and think about that for a second. An alarm starts screaming. A screen flashes red. You have a few minutes, maybe even less, to make a decision that could kill billions of people. Do you follow the rulebook, or do you trust that little voice in your head?
See, this wasn't some kind of hypothetical question. For a few very real people, this was their job. They were the absolute last line of defense, not with a weapon, but with a single, powerful word, no. And their stories, man, they're a chilling reminder of just how fragile our survival has been. Okay, so our first stop is a world where our technology, the very thing that was supposed to keep us safe, becomes the biggest threat. These are the moments where the only thing standing between us and total oblivion was one person's gut feeling to question the machine. Just try to picture this scene. You're deep underground in a concrete bunker. It's dead quiet. And then suddenly, this piercing alarm just rips through the air. Red lights are flashing everywhere, and the computer screen, the most advanced piece of tech the Soviet Union has, is telling you the one thing you never wanted to see. America has launched its missiles. The attack is underway. The guy on duty that night was a lieutenant colonel named Stanislav Petrov. And for him, the protocol was absolutely crystal clear. Report the attack up the chain of command, which would immediately kick off a massive all-out Soviet counterattack. But he paused. Something just felt wrong. His gut was screaming at him. Why only 5 missiles? A real first strike wouldn't be a handful of missiles. It would be hundreds, thousands. It would be overwhelming. So, going against everything he'd ever been trained to do, he made a choice. With absolutely nothing showing up on ground radar to back up the computer, Petrov took a massive gamble. He picked up the phone and reported a system malfunction. For what must have felt like the longest minutes of his life, he just had to wait, knowing that if he was wrong, he had just doomed his country. But he wasn't wrong. It turned out that the sun's glare reflecting off some high-altitude clouds had tricked the satellites. One man's gut feeling literally saved the world. And you'd think that would be enough drama for 1 year, but nope. Just a couple of months later, the world went careening toward the edge all over again. Only this time it wasn't a computer glitch. It was a military exercise, a war game so realistic that it was completely and almost fatally misunderstood. So look at this. On the left, you've got NATO's perspective. For them, Exercise Able Archer was just a drill, a test of their systems. They were using new, realistic codes, they went radio silent, they even simulated raising the alert level to DEFCON 1, which is the final step before launch. But then you look at the right, to the Kremlin, which was already super paranoid about a surprise attack. This didn't look like a drill at all. They saw all this activity and thought, this is it. The exercise is just a cover for a real attack. The gap in perception here is absolutely terrifying. So, the Soviets start getting their own nuclear forces ready to go. They're literally loading warheads onto their bombers. And the craziest part, NATO had no idea that Moscow was in a full-blown panic. But one U.S. Air Force officer, Lieutenant General Leonard Perutz, saw the unusual Soviet activity on his screens. Now, his job was to match their alert level, to escalate. But just like Petrov, he stopped. He waited. And that decision not to immediately escalate may have prevented a panic-fueled chain reaction that neither side could have stopped. All right. Now we have to talk about the big one, the most famous, most terrifying showdown of the entire Cold War. This wasn't about buggy computers or a drill gone wrong. This was a direct, eyeball-to-eyeball standoff between the two most powerful nations on Earth, with all of us caught in the middle. We're talking, of course, about the Cuban Missile Crisis. In October of 1962, the U.S. finds out the Soviets are secretly putting nuclear missiles in Cuba just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And look how fast things spun out of control. It goes from discovery to Kennedy announcing a naval blockade to the absolutely horrifying moment on Black Saturday when a U.S. spy plane is shot down. Every single day, the world was getting closer and closer to the unthinkable. And this is the part that will give you chills. At the time, the U.S. leadership thought the missiles in Cuba weren't even armed or ready yet. But we found out much later that was completely wrong. There were 162 Soviet nuclear warheads already on the island, ready to go. And some of the local Soviet commanders actually had the authority to launch them if they thought they were being invaded. 162. Just let that number sink in. So while all the high-stakes drama with Kennedy and Khrushchev was playing out on the world stage, a totally separate crisis was happening in secret, deep under the ocean. A Soviet sub, the B-59, was being hunted by U.S. warships. They were dropping these small, non-lethal depth charges to try and force it to surface. But the crew on that sub, they were completely cut off from Moscow. They had no idea what was going on. They just thought World War III had started. The captain of the submarine was exhausted, stressed, and totally convinced they were under attack. He gave the order to arm and fire their nuclear torpedo. Now, on a Soviet sub, launching required the unanimous consent of 3 senior officers. The captain said yes, the political officer said yes, but the third man, Vasily Arkhipov, said no. He single-handedly stood his ground, argued them down, and refused to consent. A single person, in a sweltering submarine, deep in the Atlantic, prevented an action that would have almost certainly started a full-blown nuclear war. So you look back at all this, and you have to ask, how? How did we survive all of this? When you really break it down, it's pretty clear our survival wasn't guaranteed by some brilliant technology or foolproof plan. It came down to something way more messy and unpredictable. Human beings making impossible choices under insane pressure. So what actually saved us? Well, it was Stanislav Petrov's gut feeling that 5 missiles just didn't make sense. It was the incredible courage of men like Arkhipov to break the chain of command and just say no. It was choosing restraint when every instinct screamed to attack. It was choosing to de-escalate instead of retaliate. In every single one of these near misses, we weren't saved by the system. We were saved by the person who had the courage to question it. You know, these stories aren't just fascinating bits of history. They're urgent warnings. They prove that the complex systems we build to protect ourselves can fail in the most spectacular and terrifying ways. We got through the Cold War thanks to a mix of incredible bravery, moments of pure wisdom, and, let's be honest, a massive amount of dumb luck. So the question we really have to ask ourselves now is, in a world that's just as complicated and tense, can we really afford to bet our survival on getting lucky again?